At the Engineering Management Institute, our research has showed that to be a great engineering manager, you must support the professional development of your team. But how can you do that? You're so busy with your own projects and invoices and clients and everything else you have going on. Well, in this episode, we're going to speak with Joe Quattrochi from the Walsh Group. Joe is the Director of Quality for their Heavy Civil Group, and he's managed quite a few teams in his career, and he puts a huge emphasis on the professional development of his team. And he's going to give us exact actions that he takes on a regular basis, including something that he does every Friday to really support his team, which has helped him to become a better manager and his team to become highly productive. Let's jump right in. All right, now I'm excited to welcome Joe Quattrochi onto the Engineering Career Coach podcast. Joe, welcome.
Thanks, Anthony, for having me.
So, Joe, you practiced as an engineer. You started, of course, like everyone, kind of as a project engineer, probably involved in technical aspects, and you've kind of worked your way up through the years, and you've had the opportunity to manage some teams, which we're going to talk about today, supporting the growth and development of your teams. But before we jump into that, Joe, why don't you give our audience a little bit of a background on your career journey and kind of how you got from where you are to where you are today?
Sure. So graduated from University of Illinois, civil engineering. Always kind of envisioned myself going the structural engineer route, want to work on skyscrapers and all that. Ended up getting a job opportunity with the Walsh Group, construction company based out of Chicago that does work across the country. And like you said, started as a project field engineer, right in on the job sites, working with the teams, learning from superintendents and seeing how we actually build our roads, bridges, buildings. Spent about 10 years kind of working on my way through that operation side, project engineer, spent some time as a field superintendent, and eventually worked my way up to a project manager, some highway work in the Chicagoland area. So through that, had worked with a lot of different personalities, a lot of different team members, both with owners, consultants, and then our own project management teams. And then had an opportunity where I moved down to Louisville, Kentucky, for the Ohio River Bridge projects down there. It was a couple $1 billion projects down there with teams of over 100 management staff. So a lot of different personalities from a lot of different areas. So gave me a really good, diverse group of people to be able to deal with, different relationships to be able to deal with. And from there, transition from the operational side of things, where I had kind of direct control of the work, to a quality management portion where I wasn't really responsible for the day-to-day activities, but it's just trying to help make sure everything was being done correctly and per the requirements. And that ultimately took me back up to Chicago, where I'm now the quality director for the Walsh Group for our heavy civil department. So kind of help oversee works across the country, providing trainings and tips, and trying to help make sure that across the board that everyone's doing what they're supposed to be doing and taking pride in the work that we're all doing.
That's great. And of course, along the way, you've managed some teams and you've had a lot of interaction with people, no doubt, in this industry. And this, of course, is a series in kind of part of a podcast series we're doing around what we found at EMI to be some of the greatest drivers of, or the key drivers of great engineering managers. And one of them being, they really support the professional development of their teams and of the people that work for them and with them. And, you contacted me because that's something that you're passionate about, and you submitted, a couple of points that I kind of looked through, and you and I went through a little bit, and I want to run through them here today. And so, before we even get into these points, Joe, just overall, like from an overall mentality for you, at what point did you kind of say, this is an important aspect of management, is focusing on people's development?
So it's a great question. So throughout the time frame, I had some really great managers and leaders that I looked up to, and some really bad ones. I will say that ultimately I ended up learning more from the bad ones of just what not to do, how I didn't want to be treated, how I could kind of tell those that weren't really looking up for me, but were just looking at that bottom line. So that took a lot out of that. That kind of said, all right, that really needs to be the focus. It wasn't so much the technical skills. You learn that in college, and like when you start, that's what you do day in, day out. But to really grow your career, to grow in the growth of the industry, it's about the relationships. It's about the people. That's really what builds everything. As I go around, even now, I'm talking to people in different jobs, and we keep saying that it's building the work always ends up being the easy part. The technical side always ends up being the easy part. It's a relationship and what you're trying to do. So it's kind of led me to kind of believe that it's not so much about what you're doing, because you can't build everything by yourself. It's more about getting everyone else on board and growing others to see the mark that they lead versus what you can yourself do.
Right. That's great. And so there's some specific points we're going to walk through here based on your experience that you've shared. And the first one is, you've come to realize that it's not about kind of the mark that you leave, but the mark that other people leave that you support. So talk a little bit about that.
So it kind of goes back to that point, though. You can't do everything by yourself. Especially, I think I really got it when I was down in Louisville, having a team of 100 people around us, that no matter how good your top performer is, if that top performer isn't bringing up the rest of the group, you're still only going to be as good as that bottom tier. And so it's really led the focus to the more you're able to spread that knowledge, spread that wealth, and help others grow in their development so that they can do more for you. That's ultimately what's going to make any team succeed, and any business succeed, any job succeed, is what the collective does versus just one or two individuals.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a challenge oftentimes actually for engineering professionals, because we are very task oriented, and we want to get a lot of stuff done throughout the course of the day. And like you said, sometimes it takes a lot to recognize that, if you have 5 people that are on your team and you're focused on your own productivity, you're missing out on 5 other people's productivity that could really ensure that the project gets done in a much higher quality in a much quicker time period, or whatever that case may be. But we tend to get kind of caught up in our own stuff. And so I do think that, that's part of being an effective manager. And it goes to exactly what we're talking about today, which is if you support your team and you help them grow and, kind of get to the level that you're at, now you have all of a sudden 5 people that are able to crank on another level. But we need to see.
And that is a hard lesson to learn. Being, like you said, engineers, we are drilled into us that we are technically oriented, that here's the problem, now go solve it. So you kind of grow in this world of being productive. And all right, the more things I can get done today, more things I check off my to-do list, that means I'm doing that much better. And it took me a while, and I think it takes a lot of engineers a long time to realize that needs to be secondary. You got to focus on the group, on the team, whether you have a lot of direct reports for you or not. You need to help grow the entire group of everyone working towards that same goal, that same vision.
Yeah, no, that's great. Another point, Joe, I know you wanted to talk through a little bit, was your own experience as a mentee and how that impacted your thoughts on supporting your team.
So, starting here, the initial mentee-mentor relationship that the company was trying to start off didn't really go as well. And I think it's a learning opportunity for a lot of companies to try to put in this mentor relationship. When you try to force it, just doesn't seem to work. And that was a scenario with us that, got introduced. Hey, this person's going to be your mentor. Go ahead and ask some questions. We sat down. We talked for about 20 minutes. It was like, all right, if you need anything, let me know. I'll be going to do my work. And same idea. He was an engineer, task oriented. He went off, did his thing. I went off. I didn't know any better. I went off, did my thing. So it again kind of turned me into, all right, well, that didn't really work. Unfortunately, had somebody that ended up reaching out to me about a year or two later that had the right idea. He was trying to grow a new strategy within the company of how to truly be a mentor and how that whole setup should work. And luckily enough, got to talk with him, and we ended up setting up routine monthly calls that kind of forced us to have that conversation. And it took a couple times, but then eventually I kind of realized, hey, I don't need this monthly call to go talk to this guy and ask him questions and see what's going on and how I should treat this scenario, that scenario. It eventually got me comfortable enough that I just go on my own and just pick up the phone, send him a note, and just go have that conversation. And that was kind of as that kind of starts sticking to me, is that it was more about that conversation, and it takes being a little uncomfortable to get comfortable.
That's interesting. And would you say, because, we often talk about the importance of finding a mentor in your engineering career, would you say though that it sounds like the consistency of that mentoring relationship in the beginning was important because it forced you to have those conversations and learn those lessons?
Exactly. That forcing it helped it, at least having that recurring meeting. It forced both of us to be engaged in it, kind of held us accountable to, hey, whether we had anything to talk about or not, it forced us to have that conversation. And most of the times it ended up just being about life. And those conversations that create that comfortableness that even now, 15 years later, we're close friends. And again, just have those conversations about life. But now we're at a point where either one of us has a issue we want to talk about work-wise, we're both more uncomfortable 15 years later having that conversation and using each other as a sounding board.
Yeah, that's great. And it is that comfort level, I think, that helps to really kind of open up the lines of communication in that mentoring relationship so that, because the person who is the mentee in the beginning needs to feel very comfortable, of course, because, you're
Sure.
younger, you have challenges, you have weaknesses, and it's not that easy to talk about them with someone else. So I think that's a great example in that, you may not talk with your mentor all the time about work stuff because you just have to get to know them a little bit and
Right.
build up that comfort level. So that's great. Joe, talk a little bit about leadership through influence.
So kind of that transition that I took from being an operational lead to handling the quality director role, I went from having 100 direct reports on a project trying to get a job done to where now I have 1 or 2 direct reports, but I have 3,000 people that I'm trying to influence on a daily basis. So it's really gone to that. It's all about that relationship. It's all about having those conversations. It's been about being a resource and support that I can't direct anybody to do anything. I can't tell anybody you have to do this, but I help explain the why. I help give them reasoning, and I help just give them support, or if nothing else, give them an ear to listen to, because oftentimes people on a job site, when you have deadlines trying to get your project done, everyone around you is also in that same boat, that you don't want to bother them to talk to them about something. So coming in, providing that resource, I'm in the lucky opportunity to be able to have that. But it's, I think, a good reminder for managers that you have to kind of force that in your weekly task. Something you have to do is set up time just to talk to your people. Just be there to listen to them. It's even more than having that open door policy. It's going to them and saying, hey, what do you need? What's going on? What can I help you with? And just being in that area. I think that's what that's really taught me, is just you have to make yourself available, and oftentimes you have to go out and ask them, do you need anything? Don't wait for them to come to you.
Yeah, that's great. And one thing that I really kind of want to reemphasize what you said there is, you mentioned that sometimes you talk to your team members about, the why behind the project or behind their work they're doing. And I think that that's really important because, like Joe said, you can't force anyone to do anything, of course, as a leader. I mean, you could tell them to do it, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do it. I find the same thing is true for parenting, right? You could tell a kid to go clean their room, but you're not going to be like, oh yeah, that's great, I'm going to go do it. So oftentimes you need to go a little bit deeper. And I've actually found this to be true with several engineering managers that we've done some coaching and training work with, is sometimes engineering can be monotonous. And if someone's doing the same thing over and over, it can become boring in a sense. But if they understand that same thing over and over is helping to, alleviate traffic on a major roadway for thousands of people every day, so they could spend an extra 10 to 20, 30 minutes with their families, all of a sudden, doing that task can take on a different mentality. And so as a leader, you're providing that narrative to kind of inspire them to do the work on a regular basis. And, really, I guess really what you're doing is you're making them aware of how important the work that they're doing is, even though it doesn't always feel that important. And so I think that that's a really good point that Joe kind of drives home there in terms of, you do have the ability to influence people and inspire people, beyond the day-to-day tasks.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly right. And kind of on that line of providing that influence, like you said, people kind of get in that monotonous routine of day in, day out, kind of doing the same thing over and over again. And even while it might be for a greater purpose, and usually always is, part of being a leader and supporting others is providing them opportunities that they may not see. That being a manager, you're able to see people on the, they may be great at what they're doing, but they may not be aware that there's opportunities elsewhere for them to even grow further and further that they don't even think is possible, or they don't know because they don't know any different. And I think that's something I've definitely been able to see going around, seeing people, and they're in their job, in their project, doing their things over and over. But when you start talking, we kind of realize, all right, what really motivates them? What is their passion behind what they do? You're able to say, hey, maybe there's another opportunity for you to take that skill set and take it that much further and take it on to the next level and grow to something beyond that they're able to, that they're currently doing. That's really been something, again, through that influence of showing them the opportunity that they don't even know they exist. Definitely something I've been striving to do more and more, just to, don't want to let people get complacent in what they're doing and just fall into a trap of, well, this is all I got. They may not know what else is out there that our job as leaders help show them that vision, what else they can do.
Yeah, that's great, because you kind of have, just based on experience, you have kind of more of that vision available to you, or a bigger perspective, just because you have the experience and you've gone through projects and you've spoke with other people. So that's great. So the next point I think is a really good one, is, treating someone as a person, not just as an employee. Talk about that a little bit, because I do see that happening a lot in engineering, where people can be a little condescending and just thinking of them as they're just another employee.
So I mean, as soon as you said, the lesson of parenthood, I mean, immediately my brain went to my 4 and 6-year-old and the lessons I'm trying to teach them right now. And it's just as simple as that, shows the human relation that we all have together. Whether, you're dealing with people on a project, you're dealing with a consultant, someone on a different party, different company, even if your competitors competing with each other, when you strip things down, we're all people that have families, have a life outside of the work that we do. And it's always been back remembering that no matter what you're trying to get across to somebody or what you're trying to do, if you have that conversation as a person, and the more you understand who the person is, the better any conversation you need to have with them goes. But especially if you're trying to have a tough conversation, you're trying to get into, convincing somebody to do something else. It's a big reason why salesmen, they always ask you, hey, what do you do? What's going on in your life? The more they know about you, the better they can have a conversation with you. And that's really what I've kind of learned, is that you need to know people, and the more you try to dig in and find out a little bit more about them, the more they start to open up, the more willing and vulnerable they're going to be with you, so that you can truly understand their passion and what they want to do, so that you can best help them. So ultimately, it goes back to that beginning statement that the more you help those other people, the more they're going to end up helping you on the back end. So it's really just getting to know people, taking that time. It's tough. Again, it's tough to set aside time that you could be getting things done on your to-do list to just have a conversation, but those end up being just as valuable as knocking something off your to-do list.
Yeah, especially in the long term, it might even, probably provide a bigger return in some way, shape, or form for you, the company, the team. And I think that what is, again, and we've done in the research that we've done on these points, this does often come back to us from the engineers that we talk to, is that, if they said that they have a great manager, one of the reasons typically is because they took the time to get to know me and to understand what my goals are and to kind of help me in that process. And when you think about it, I mean, now it seems obvious when someone says that. I mean, of course, that would be interesting to people if someone really cared about them and was looking to promote them and help them in their careers. But again, like Joe and I have been saying, like when you're kind of in the project trenches and you're grinding through a to-do list and you're meeting with clients and you got invoices to do and you got meetings to go to, it doesn't always, become at the forefront, and you don't always think about taking the time to get to know people, whether it's, taking your team out to lunch once in a while or whatever you need to
Mm-hmm.
do that, they're not as obvious as it sounds now. We're sitting here and we're doing a whole podcast episode on the topic because that's the topic that we're focused on. So,
Right.
that's one of the reasons that we do this podcast, is because, you may be listening to this on your commute or whatever the case may be. And we're hoping that you can try to remember these things, in the day-to-day activities so you can implement, some of them. And we'll kind of touch on that a little bit more in our end segment here. All right, Joe. So the last point for you to talk a little bit on here before we start wrapping up is let them go. They may be back, but they will grow and show others of opportunity.
So one of the hardest lessons that I had to learn a few years back, kind of getting in this role of managing more people, was letting people go, knowing that with their needs, their wants in their career were more important than the company. Obviously the company never wants to lose good people. We always want to keep growing in any business. You want to keep your good people, but sometimes that means letting go. Had some situations where, people's family situation obviously is more important than the job. That's something that I often tell people, that, if asking them to possibly relocate or, might have a job opportunity, but, include some travel, tell them the first thing, you got to talk to your family. You got to determine what is most important to you and your family. Because if your family life isn't happy, then your company life's not going to be happy, and you're ultimately not going to perform at the best of your abilities, and that's what we need. So it took some time to kind of come to this realization where we're trying to fight for people and say, hey, we'll give you this, or, maybe we'll make this work. Ultimately, it's just kind of come back to people need to make the right decisions for their families and their livelihoods first, and then to the business side second. And often what we've seen is by providing that conversation, having that heart-to-heart, which again goes back to making sure that you know the people in your heart, you know them as a person, so you can have that kind of frank conversation with them to make sure they're making the right decisions for themselves and their family, and not just looking at it from a business decision. What we've seen out of that, at least what I've personally seen, is a lot of those that, may end up leaving, whether, they get an offer from another company or relocation isn't the best idea for them. Majority of them end up coming back because we treated them as a person that first time around, that we made sure that they were making the right decision, try to help them make the right decision for them and their families. What's also shown is everyone else kind of sees this and sees that, hey, yeah, we left, somebody left the company, here's the reason why. We're very transparent about it, that try to make an opportunity work, but they had to do the right decision for their families. And it shows everyone else that that's what we care about. That and specifically that if the company was looking at me to relocate, my first thing would be, I got to talk to my family. I got to make sure it's the right decision for me and my family, what we want. And knowing that we're able to have that conversation, that means so much. That just knowing that is there, that's an opportunity to have that conversation, make sure it's the right decision, is huge and means so much. That, again, like you said, Anthony, that you care about the people as a person.
Right. Yeah, no. And like you said, when someone comes to you, or if the company goes to someone and says, we want you to relocate, it sounds like the mentality that you take on is, we want you to relocate, but we also want you to go talk to your family and make sure that it's the right fit for them. And if we need to talk through anything together, we can. And that's, I think, like you said, the approach that makes people want to, they start to view the company as a family as opposed to just somewhere I got to go every day to get a paycheck. And I think that that's really what makes, in my opinion, great managers, really.
Absolutely. I mean, just that opportunity of showing them the opportunity is there for, if they are interested in leaving or interested in relocating, or in the same thing, that they have the opportunity to say no, say, hey, this is the right decision for me and my family. Because ultimately, if you try to put people in positions that they're not going to be happy, they're not going to be helpful for the team. They're not going to be helpful for the project, and it's just going to end up pulling everyone else down with it.
All right. So again, we're really focused here in this episode on how to provide professional development, career development opportunities, and really support your team. Joe and I are going to come back in a minute. We're going to wrap this up by just giving a quick recap of the points we discussed and try to give you some action items that you can take immediately and implement if you want to start to really think about how you can support your team. So stick with us. We'll be right back. All right, so we're back with our guest for today, Joe Quattrochi from the Walsh Group. Joe is an engineer, worked his way up through the ranks, has had the opportunity to manage some teams, and puts a real emphasis and focus on supporting his team members in their own professional development, in their career, in their lives. And that's a big focus of what we found to be a key driver of great engineering managers. So real quick, I'm going to recap some of the points that Joe went through today, and then I'm going to ask him one more question, really to give you an action that you can take in your career to start to support your team, or even if you're an aspiring manager, just to get in the right, frame of mind for when you do take on that management role. So we talked about not thinking so much about the mark that you leave, but the mark that the people you support leads. You could think about supporting them. Joe walked through his experience as a mentee in the first mentoring relationship, where he took some time to learn about his mentor personally and vice versa. So they built up that comfort level that you can really use to open the lines of communication. Joe talked about having that kind of influence as a leader where you can really teach people or talk about the why behind their jobs to inspire them and kind of influence them to stay motivated and passionate in their career. Talked about treating people as people and not just as employees, and making sure that their work life as well as their personal life are really, they're happy in both, because if they're not happy in both, they're not going to be successful and happy in their jobs and not going to want to come back. And that was the last point, is if you really take care of your staff, they're going to come back to you regardless of what happens, because you're treating them as a person. So Joe, these are all awesome points, and I think just they're going to be very helpful for our listeners for sure. But if the listener they just listen, they enjoyed the episode, they want to go out and do something actionable to start supporting their team members better, prepare to do that, what's something that you can offer to them that maybe you've done or that's been helpful for you specifically?
So 2 items that help me keep on track on this. Like I said, started off as an engineer, still an engineer at heart. So obviously I want to knock things off my to-do list every single day. So one of those is I have it on my to-do list. I have every Friday, I have a hour and a half time block every Friday morning that is stop what you're doing and go talk to people. So I take that time, it's on my calendar, go out, talk to my direct reports here, talk to different people here in the office, make some phone calls, and have that just be time that's simply about people. Not about getting things done, just simply about the people. So along with that, there's about 25 key reports that are not local to the office. So you don't have the ability to have that water cooler talk with them. So I have on the board just the last time I've talked to them, because I try to make it at least every month, I've talked to every single one of them. So I have just on the board last time I talked to them, and I'll look on that board every Friday. All right, who haven't I talked to recently? Just through the course of the week, realize there's a couple people. So those are the people I give a call to that day. And it, again, helps it stay visible for me, holds me accountable to make sure that I'm the one putting forth the effort and making sure I'm contacting these people and just having that conversation and seeing wherever that goes. But I found these to be very helpful in keeping me accountable, have these conversations, and just keep me in the routine that it is just about the people. And the more I'm helping them, the more they're helping me.
That's awesome. And what I really love about Joe's recommendations there is that anytime you try to improve at some kind of skill set or some kind of behavior, you need consistency. I mean, we talked about this earlier with the mentoring. And so by Joe having some kind of a, good process in place where he can see who he's talked to, who he hasn't, he knows he has to follow up with certain people, and he does it once a week, which is great to dedicate that time, because obviously he feels that this is important enough to dedicate time on a weekly basis to. That just is a consistency that you need to improve behaviors, make sure you're doing something on a regular basis. Because if you say to yourself, well, this was a great episode with Joe and Anthony, I'm going to start talking with people more, I'm going to start doing some of this stuff, but you have no really way to keep yourself accountable and make sure you're doing it consistently, it's going to be a thought, and everything else, your projects and everything else, is going to probably come and overwhelm you, and you're not going to keep up with it. Not because you're bad at it, just because life happens and projects happen and it overwhelms you. So that's why we're doing this series, because we did identify these 4 key drivers of great engineering manager, and this being one of them. So think of ways that you can build into your everyday routines some of these drivers, one of them being supporting your team, and Joe has given us a really good way to do that. So, Joe, thank you so much. We know how busy you are at work with all the projects and all the people that you deal with, and we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to come on the podcast and talk a little bit about, what you've done to support your team, and we really thank you for doing this.
No, thank you, Anthony. It was fun.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please leave your comments and/or questions in the comments section below this video. Also, if you'd like to view the full show notes for this episode, visit engineeringmanagementinstitute.org or see the link in the video description. There you will find the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during the episode. Until next time, I wish you the best in all of your engineering career endeavors.